Sex positions, sex life, fulfilled marriages. That's what we're talking about today. Today's conversation isn't all about sex positions. It's not about tricks, and it's definitely not about trying harder. This is about why good marriages lose their momentum and lose their intimacy over time. So today, I've got an incredible guest on the podcast today. Her name is Dr. Nicole McNichols, and she is a psychologist, and she is also a professor at the University of Washington, and she just wrote a book called You Could Be Having Better Sex. She's been married for 22 years. She's got 3 kids, so she knows what it's like to be busy, and she talks about a ton today that is really going to help us out. If you're in a situation where you're married, you feel disconnected, and you're wondering, like, what do I need to do? I'm sick and tired of trying harder. I want to know the right things to do, not guess all the time. This podcast today with Dr. Nicole is definitely for you. Let's get into it. Dr. Nicole, what's going on? Good to see you.
It is so good to see you, Larry. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's always a good day when we can podcast when we talk about sex.
I agree, right? Is there ever a bad day to talk about sex? I mean,
I've been told there's a few.
Well, I guess.
But no, I love the attitude.
Thank you.
My first question is, it's crazy that I'm interviewing you because literally the day that I'm interviewing you, we just had another podcast released today from a couple, and it's called Intimacy Evolution, and so like they're intimacy and sex experts. So, but the husband and the wife were on. So like I was joking with the husband, I was like, you got to bring your wife on because anytime we have a female that talks about this topic, our downloads go like to another universe. Like they're so
really, I love that. I love that. Great.
But here's my first question, and I asked Brianna the same question. I was like, okay, so like when you're in 3rd grade, like I'm like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I guarantee this probably wasn't it, right?
No, definitely.
So
I definitely did not grow up thinking I would become a sex professor. Firefighter, policewoman, maybe, but I thought I wanted to be a writer for a long time, which I guess I kind of am. Yeah, exactly. And no, I came out of graduate school, so I have a PhD in psychology, and I really came out of grad school thinking that I wanted to help people who were struggling with loneliness. I looked around and saw an epidemic of people who were suffering with anxiety and depression and increasing feelings of disconnection, mostly just because of the world that we're living in, technology, social media. I mean, that could be its own podcast episode, probably all the reasons that we're feeling disconnected. But the professor who had taught the course for several years, 30 years before me, fell and broke her leg 2 weeks before the quarter started. And an SOS went out in the department. At the time, I was teaching psychology classes, just sort of 101 and social psychology. And they kind of were panicked about who was going to step in to take over this course. And so I joke to people that I sort of raised my hand Katniss Everdeen style and said, sure, I'll do it. I think most other faculty members were smart enough to think this could be awkward at best, but it's full of landmines. So I took it over. And as soon as I started teaching it, I mean, really almost from day one, there was something about seeing the hunger in my students' eyes for information, just the profound level of curiosity that they had about a topic that I soon realized is really central to ourselves, is really part of what makes us obviously able to connect to other people. And yet we have a sense of disconnection when it comes to our sex lives because we treat it as something that you have to earn, that pleasure overall is a treat, that it's something that you quote unquote, get lucky for. And there's just so much shame and stigma around the topic, and particularly around female sexual pleasure, that I just realized if I could help my students to have a sense of empowerment and understanding that was guided by the research as well as, of course, bringing in some of my own personal experiences and conversations with others that I've, worked with and, that are people who I know have lived experience, that I could really help them at a profound level reconnect to their sexual selves, feel empowered, and embrace something that was really central to who they are. And so I'm not purporting to be able to solve the entire loneliness epidemic simply by teaching people about sex. But I do think, given the research about the profound role that sex and sexual satisfaction play in the strength of our relationships, in our ability even to forgive our partner's imperfections, in our ability to thrive, in our health outcomes, whether it is cardiovascular health or longevity, even immune function, healthy sex improves all of those elements. And by helping students sort of understand and have access to the knowledge where they can make decisions and create the sexual experiences that make them happy, not the experiences that they've seen in porn or on social media or in the media, like, TV shows about what they're supposed to want, that they could really feel empowered to make individual choices that brought them a profound sense of happiness.
Man, that might be, I think, the most robust answer I think I've ever gotten of why someone does what they do. And
Thank you.
I love the fact that you do this in a way. It's like I love the motivation behind it because it's like, hey, this is part of who we are as human beings, and this is part of like how we celebrate our relationship, and we should be able to talk about it, and we should be able, it should be all of these different things that I think it's so the topic is so taboo, and it arises, experiences from when we were kids, like even like how our own parents like maybe framed sex, like so if they framed it like in this sort of like guilt thing, that
Exactly.
yeah. Talk to me
No.
about that one if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing I see too with, these thousands of students who take my class each year, is that many of them are coming from, there's no federally mandated sex education. So many of them have had no sex education, or they've, maybe learned about reproduction and how not to get pregnant and STIs, but that's kind of it. They haven't learned anything about what a healthy sexual experience or relationship actually looks like. And the reason is that we are so ashamed of this topic in general, right? We do treat it as something that's minimal and not important to our mental health. And there's just, still today, especially around female sexual pleasure, just so much shame and misinformation and ignorance about a topic that's so critical to our happiness.
Yeah. So how do we? Let me ask about that because I have a couple questions I really want to get to, but this is really good. So like in situations like that where one person might feel like, well, I was kind of raised that like you just don't do that, you don't talk about that, you don't like, and it's even as like an adult, like there's that sort of like that little kid in you that
Yes.
feels shame, guilt. Should I even be talking about this? Is this right? Is this not? So like, how do we? How do we get rid of that and create a space where we can communicate about it without that shame?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is I show them statistics and data from places in the world where they do have honest, positive conversations about sex. So the Netherlands, for example, is really known for having very robust, healthy, sex positive sex education that begins at a young age in an age appropriate way. And our instinct in this country is to limit sex education because we believe that it will lead to people being promiscuous or, having, more teenage pregnancy or getting STIs. But the reality is that in those countries where there is sex positive, informed, evidence based education, they have fewer rates of STIs, they have fewer unplanned pregnancies, they have a higher percentage of people, particularly women, reporting that their first time sexual experience was a positive one, and they have less sexual assault. So I talk about how, first of all, if we're going to be looking at this from a data informed point of view, the evidence is clear that talking about these things and being educated leads to less problems, not more. But then beyond that, at a personal level, it's really important that I help students understand, okay, what exactly are the sources of shame that you're bringing with you mentally, right? Today, in the classroom, in life, in your communities, what were you taught about sex, right? What is this story, this narrative about what sex is or isn't, what's normal versus not normal? Where did that come from? Because I think sometimes the best tool for eliminating shame and stigma is simply to be able to just identify the massive amounts of shame and stigma around sex that are already operating within our sex lives and really impeding our ability to live a happy, connected life.
Man, I love that. And so what would you say to a couple if you were advising them on what's the first step? Like what does the approach even look like for a conversation like that?
Well, it really depends on, what the starting point is, right? So if you have a couple, for example, that is, mostly connected, they're having sex, but they don't really feel like they're setting the curtains on fire. And they're looking to, improve the quality of sex in their lives so they can reap all those benefits, right? I think the first recommendation I have is to sit down with your partner and ask a series of questions where you really are communicating what kind of sex do you want to be having? Because so often, I think, and particularly for women, there can be this desire, first of all, we're all so exhausted. I mean, I have 3 kids. I've been married for 22 years. I have a job. My husband has a job. We're both very busy. It's an incredibly, midlife can be an extremely busy, overwhelming time. And so if you, can first of all say, yes, we're overwhelmed with all of these burdens, but sex shouldn't be the thing that we put on the back burner. We might think that, especially we're making all these New Year's resolutions, that sex isn't that important. The first step is really prioritizing it and saying to each other, okay, this might be a little bit awkward to talk about, but we really should because the quality of our sex life, A, it absolutely can get better. And B, yes, it is worth it to try to level up your sex life because it's going to lead to a whole cascade of positive consequences, both at an individual as well as a relational level. And so, concretely, in terms of what I think would be helpful for couples to sort of start doing, is to pick a time, right? And communication, these kinds of larger conversations about your sex life, they're really best done with your clothes on when you're not about to have sex or having just had sex, right? Because it's a vulnerable conversation and you want to be able to be honest and thoughtful and not have this mindset on that you could be criticized or rejected, right? Because that's often something that couples can struggle with. But I would start just by sitting down. And I'm a big believer that we should lean into the finding that positive reinforcement often works better than negative reinforcement or punishment. So just start by asking each other questions like, what's the best sex we've ever had? What's your favorite time of day to have sex? What helps you to feel more in the mood? What kinds of things do I do that you absolutely love that we could try more of? What are your sexual fantasies? What could we try out? So I think that, and I have a series of questions that sort of get progressively deeper and deeper into this topic, forgive the pun, that really help couples uncover what is it that we need to discover in order to be creating the types of sexual experiences that we are naturally going to crave, right? Because the reality is, no one craves bad sex. And if you're feeling like, ugh, I know I should have better sex, but I just don't really know, is that even possible or is it really worth it? the trick isn't forcing yourself to be having sex you don't want to have. Change the quality of your sexual experiences by leading from this place of curiosity and having a growth mindset. And then as your experiences naturally become more pleasurable, as you're having more orgasms, as you're having more pleasure during sex, that's naturally going to lead you to want more of it.
Hey, if what you're hearing right now is hitting home, here is the truth that most of us men never hear. Attraction, intimacy, and connection, these things don't break overnight. They erode over time slowly when we stop leading emotionally and we stop connecting and we kind of like live in autopilot. What we're doing in the Dad Edge Alliance in February is we're going to be doing a 4-part series focused entirely on attraction, intimacy, sex, and connection within marriage. It's not theory and it's not sex tips. It's about learning how to show up that makes your wife feel seen, heard, and actually attracted to you, drawn to you, magnetic towards you. That's what we're going to be talking about in February. So we're going to be teaching our guys in February. Each week, we're going to be breaking down one skill that you can actually practice the very same day you learn it, not to mention the fact you're going to be learning this in the environment with other men who are eager to learn it as well and to implement it. We all need brothers in our corner, and we all need to learn this stuff because, quite frankly, like, no wonder a bunch of us don't have the marriages and the sex lives we wanted. We're never taught this stuff, ever. We're taught about every other thing, algebra and parallelograms and science and technology and English and literature. But man, this stuff, we never get taught this stuff. But the great news is we get to now. All you have to do is head on over to the dadedgealliance.com. I'm sorry, the dadedge.com/alliance. Go ahead and apply for the Alliance for all my career guys. And if you are a business owner, the boardroom is your pathway. Gentlemen, let's have a kick-ass 2026, and it all starts in February. Back to the show. I love that. And I love how the approach is coming from a place of curiosity.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we always coach to and teach in our community is go to every conversation with curiosity and appreciation instead of expectation and agenda. So, because that feels heavy, right? But it's like, hey, like, let's explore a conversation versus like get to the finish line of it, right? Of what I want or what you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I would say sexual curiosity is probably the most important ingredient for a fantastic sex life, 1,000,000%, because that's just going to be leading you to a place of believing that it can change and doing things like, embracing failure and understanding that it's not going to always be perfect and that you're going to try things and they might be epic, hilarious fails. That's okay, right? That's part of this curiosity process. But it's through the communication of understanding what is turning the other person on. How do you shift from, because the reality is, you know, a lot of sex therapists are going to recommend scheduling sex, right? I mean, that's probably the biggest piece of information that we hear. And, I have a somewhat different approach because I really think that rather than thinking about just, I'm loading the dishwasher on Wednesday night and it's 8 p.m., it's sexy time. Let's go just in the middle of our productive mindset, expect ourselves to turn on. I don't think that's really that realistic. And, can sort of be hard. But if you set what I call an intimacy date, right, which still has this element of planning, but it's acknowledging that you're not just planning, this physical sexual act of jumping into bed with each other. You're planning an ability to create the right context and mood to be able to transition into a place where you want to have sex with your partner. Because, research that's looked at couples who are in long-term relationships and report having a lot of passion and report having a high level of sexual satisfaction. Well, one major thing that it's been found those couples do is they set the mood. They give their nervous systems time to connect. They give each other cues about what is going to make them feel the most turned on, and they give attention to that, right? And so it might be, after you've had, right, these conversations that we talked about that are led by curiosity, it's also that intention of, yes, scheduling time when you're not expecting yourselves to just instantly turn on and jump into bed and have wild orgasms, but scheduling this time where you connect and you create an environment that's going to invite sexual intimacy and that erotic mindset that you really need to enter into to be able to enjoy and get into sex.
So this is, I think, right along the lines of one of the questions I want to ask you, because I think it really relates to timing, conversations, connection, things that happen outside the bedroom. So in long-term marriages, what do men consistently mistake sexual effort that actually creates pressure and tension for a woman instead of desire?
Well, I think that so often, we do see that very often women have more of what we call responsive desire, whereas men have oftentimes spontaneous desire. Not always, right? Actually, if you ask couples therapists, believe it or not, they'll often say that the couples who end up in their offices because of sexual problems, which is the number one reason that they tend to go, that a lot of times it's actually the woman who's craving more sex, the wife, and the husband. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Now, that
It's
might
really interesting.
it might be because it's, in we have this narrative that women are the sexual gatekeepers and men are the initiators. And so in a relationship where the woman is less interested in sex, that's normalized. And so they're less likely to seek therapy, which is kind of the situation you're talking about. But I just want to kind of lay it out there that it's not always the case that it's the husband or the man in the relationship that wants more sex. Um, but having said that, I think that what often happens that can be really tricky is men don't really know their, husbands or partners, they don't really know sort of the right way to help their female partner get into that mood, right? They don't know the right way to initiate. They don't know exactly, this idea that, I mean, look, it's been found that within the sexual response cycle, women are more likely to orgasm when there's emotional intimacy, right? So we tend to be, so focused on sex as this procedure and something that you just kind of jump into that I think, a lot of husbands can start to maybe forget that there needs to be sort of this like emotional lead up. And so then you just sort of set into this, you know, um, pattern of he initiates and then she's not in the mood. So she turns it down. And then it can turn into this cycle of initiation and rejection that can just lead to real feelings of disconnect and even resentment and anger. And then that can lead to the wife or the woman feeling a profound sense of guilt, right? And I mean, I've been in that cycle before. I mean, I remember when I had, we talked earlier before we started the podcast about how we both have multiple children, right? I remember, especially in those years when my kids were really young and I was exhausted, right? And, I also had all this burden of trying to be the perfect mother that I think many women today are really up against too, that gets in the way for sure. But I'd get into bed at the end of the day and just after being around toddlers all day and the holding and the breastfeeding, you feel a little bit touched out, right? And then your partner kind of goes to initiate sex and you haven't had that transition time. And so suddenly you almost start to feel like your partner is just one more person asking for you to fulfill their physical needs, which is a horrible thing to feel, right? And I had a profound sense of guilt about feeling like sex was becoming that way with my husband. And it really took sort of this carving out of our intimacy dates where yes, the idea was that in the back of our brains, sex was hopefully on the calendar, but there was that time to connect and that time to transition, whether it meant hiring a babysitter and going out to dinner and having an adult conversation that wasn't interrupted by our kids, or giving each other a massage before, having time where we talk and share aspects about our days, and not just about our days, but really leaning into understanding, what are you thinking and feeling right now? Not just about when you need to go change the diaper, but how are you actually feeling about life and what's working, what's making you happy, what feels like it's going amazing, and then what do you feel like you're struggling with? And, are there ways we can maybe problem solve together, or maybe you just need to be able to vent and express just, the exhaustion and frustration that you're feeling before, you can release that and feel connected and then get into a place where you're more receptive to sex. So I think it's just about, again, it goes back to the fact that we tend in our culture to think of sex as a very physical activity, which obviously it is, but there's this whole relational and emotional experience around it that we need to be able to cultivate and be mindful of if we're going to be having the sex that we want to have that's truly pleasurable.
I love hearing that. I have a really interesting sort of odd question for you, and this is just from my own experience here
I
lately.
love odd questions.
Well, I mean, like I'm, I'll just, I'm very open. I mean, like my sex drive's high. It's just,
Yeah,
it always has been. At 50 years old, it hasn't changed since I was like a teenager.
great.
But here's the crazy thing. Um, Zero complaints with my sex life and my wife. Like we're good. Um, but the older I get, and she and I literally just had this conversation. Like we went out to like do like an escape date because it was Christmas
Love it.
break, right? So it was like 2 weeks, kids nonstop, it was like, and there wasn't hardly any time for us. So like that kind of built up, and it was like there was like tension, and there was disconnect. There was nothing wrong. We weren't fighting, but there was like disconnect. We were so busy, like we call it spinning in our own orbits. Like I'm taking care of this, I'm taking care of this. I got this kid, you got this kid. It's like right, and we're not connecting. And this was like the night before this escape date on a Sunday. It was Saturday night. And this is so unlike me, but like I don't know if I'm just sort of maturing. And she was on the same page I was, and I found out the next day. But here's what happened. So like we hadn't like really connected. We hadn't gone on
Hmm.
a date. We hadn't really talked. Like literally, we're like totally parents, right? And it was like midnight. And here's one of the other things too. Like I love your question of when's the best time of the day, because we both agreed. We're like, hey, sex is off the table at night. Like I know it sounds kind of weird, but like she felt tension and pressure. Like should we? And like I felt like sometimes I'm like, oh my god, I'm so exhausted. Like it, it's just I'm tired, right? So
Yeah.
like, but so we were just like, you know what? Like we both really love day sex. Like what if we just took night sex off the table unless we really really wanted it, and then maybe then. So like it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, which is crazy late for us. And she like came over and she's like, hey, like I know it's been a minute, like so like do you want to? And I'm like, and I looked at her and I was like, and I don't know what it was in me, I was just like, why don't we wait? And she's like, what? And I was like, why don't we just, unless you really want to? She's like, no, she's like, I'm tired too. She's like, I just know it's been a while. I was like, no. I was like, why don't we wait? And she's like, oh, okay, that's fine. So the next day, and I'm like waking up, and I was like, why did I? So then we go to church, and then we go escape and have this day date, like this lunch. I was like, hey, I want to talk to you about something about that happened last night. That my response to you. She's like, yeah, what happened? I was like, I don't know, Jess. I was like, I'm just sort of in this season now where we have insanely good sex when we're connected, like
Yep.
really connected. And I was
Yep.
like, and I would rather not have mediocre sex just to have it. I'd rather have like crazy, connected, amazing sex, right?
Yes.
It- And so we come home after this day date. It's on a Sunday, and we come home. We pass the kids in the living room, and she's like, "We got like 3 minutes. Let's go." And I'm like, "All right."
I love
So we did, which is
it.
pretty typical for us to like kind of like sneak away. But like it was like, and it was awesome. It was like it
That's
was amazing because
amazing.
it was like we were reconnected again. And I was like, and we both looked at each other, and I was like, man, that's what I'm talking about. She's like, amen to that. Yes, that's what I'm talking about too. So like, I don't know. It's like we're in the season now where we actually both want that. And I would say like the first 10 years of our marriage, I'd be like, I'll take whatever.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would say that, a similar thing has happened in my own relationship because early on, there's this concept of maintenance sex, right? Which I
Right.
just hate that
Never
word,
heard that.
right?
I've never heard that, but keep going. I've never heard that. This is great.
So, I mean, it's sort of this balance, right? Because I do think, I mean, look, the reality is that when you look at research, couples that have sex once a week or more tend to report higher levels of sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction than couples who don't. There's no added benefit, though, beyond that, which is sort of the good news. Meaning that you don't have to have an astronomical amount of sex in order to be having, an incredibly satisfying relationship. But that question then becomes, if you are sort of in that phase of, I mean, my God, it was just wild, when our three kids were under 10 and we were just exhausted a lot of the time. And, sex is important. And so, on the one hand, yes, obviously we want to be cultivating the sexual experiences that are absolutely amazing and the most pleasurable that they can possibly be. But we don't want to put so much pressure on the experience that we forget that sometimes we just need to sexually connect. And sometimes we need to not hold ourselves to these insanely high standards and compare ourselves and think, oh my God, if it's not like that, it's never worth it. But I mean, Larry, what you and I are both experiencing really in this stage, right? We both have older kids. We're, yes, or in our own orbits, but at the same time, right, we have the ability and the time to be able to say, let's connect, let's get into this mindset, which is really what I'm talking about, right, with these intimacy dates. And so again, I hate this idea of maintenance sex because it just sounds so unenjoyable and just completely lacks an attention to pleasure. But at the same time, yes, the goal should be having these connected, amazing sexual experiences. But I just want to, reassure people if you feel like, it's kind of like food. I love food. I love eating. My husband and I love going out to dinner together. We love food and wine. But like, not every single meal that I have has to be gourmet, incredible food, right? Sometimes you're just eating for fuel. And, that does sound a little bit boring, but it is, if you are just in a stage of life where you feel like you want the connection, but you're not yet, you know, in a place mentally where you feel like you can be having conversations about expansion, right? That's okay, right? In other words, that is totally okay. But it's also fantastic to be in a place in your life where you're like, this is something I want to focus on and I want to up level our sex life and I want to have connected sex and I want to be able to explore our different erogenous zones and try different techniques and ask each other, what is kind of the hottest thing that we can try and ways that we can spice up our sex life. I just don't want people to feel like you can only have hot sex if the conditions are absolutely perfect. So I guess I'm just saying it's sort of that balance, right?
Yeah. No, I love that. I've never heard the term maintenance sex, but if I would have heard that, like if I would interview last week, I'd be like, let's not have maintenance sex. Let's
Right.
have good sex. Like,
Exactly.
yeah. I love that. All right, so I have one other scenario for you. And the guys that come and knock on my virtual doorstep, that want help, even though it's the dad edge, marriage is usually the tip of the spear for guys who come into my ecosystem.
Yes.
I've been coaching men in marriage and intimacy and connection for about 7 years now. And but here's I need you to help me. How about this?
I love
Okay.
that. That's why I do what I do.
So here's what here's what I tell guys. So when guys come in, like knock on my doorstep, it's usually like, hey man, I need help. She just told me that she's she wants to split up. She's done. She doesn't love me. She loves me, but she's not in love with me. She doesn't want intimacy anymore. She just wants to be co-parents. Like no more sex at all. We're just gonna raise these kids. I don't want a divorce. Or it's like literally like let's lead totally separate lives, but raise these kids together. And I had a client, and this is normal for my clients, unfortunately, before I start working with them. I had a guy, and this guy just finished up with me, and luckily his relationship is, thank God, is flourishing again. But before we started working together, 4 straight years, he would call them trimesters. He's like, dude, 4 straight years of having sex 3 times a year. And this guy got to me, and he's just like, I'm like, man, you should have knocked on my door like 5 years ago, right? But anyway, we worked together. It worked out. But like sometimes when I get to a guy like that, I always say, I'm like, okay, I was like, we're trying to recover from a nuclear bomb right now. I was like,
Right.
there's so much tension. There's so much resentment. So the resentment on your side now, because man, your needs are not being met. You feel rejected. You feel emasculated. You don't even feel like a man. She probably doesn't feel seen. She probably doesn't feel safe or heard or anything like that. She feels resentful. So we're in this cycle of like epic,
Yeah.
horrible resentment. And it's just like how we break that cycle. Like usually what I see, I can see that cycle start to break within about 7 weeks. But oh my gosh, it is like the heaviest lift
Yep.
ever. So like guys who don't work with coaches or guys who don't work with therapists, like how do you break that resentment cycle?
Well, I mean, I think you just hit the nail on the head, right? With this idea that, first of all, it's definitely going to be a heavy lift, but it's also just going to be highly dependent on what's led to those feelings of separation, right? And so this is where, I tell people that you have to kind of look at, is this something that's happening mostly at an individual level? Or is it something that is going on in your relationship, right? In other words, is it possible that one or both of you have lost your sex drive because of stress, because you're exhausted, because you feel overwhelmed? So much research now on the impact of perimenopause and menopause, right? As well as the astronomical effect of, HRT therapy that's now finally had its, black box warning removed. Um, they're
What,
just,
what's the black box warning?
well, it used to be that HRT was deemed as dangerous for women, that it would, lead to increased cancer rates. But that study that had that data was deeply flawed. It was from a 2002 study. And there's been a lot of, for so long, women who are going through menopause or perimenopause were really sort of gaslit by their providers a lot of the time and just told, it's you can't do HRT, it's not good for you. This, you're fine, you're just tired. But the reality is that those declining levels of progesterone and estrogen can have a monumental effect on how you feel, on your mood, and definitely on your sex drive. So I would definitely say that that is something that women should look into. And sometimes unfortunately, sometimes your main health provider may not be the most informed, right, about this. I mean, a lot of times it's, again, it was literally in the last 6 months that now there's not that warning on it. So a lot of them are still just very risk adverse. But the reality is that if you really dig into the data, right, and go to a health practitioner who really understands menopause and perimenopause and hormone replacement therapy, it can be hugely beneficial, right? And so I would say, just as a starting point, looking at both people as individuals to make sure, are you exhausted? Are you feeling stressed out, tapped out? And are your hormones completely off? Right. And then, because a lot of times we want to look at our partner and blame our partner and that's a natural tendency because we see them right in front of us and we assume it's something that's wrong with the relationship. But a lot of times, and this is for women and men, it could just have something to do with you that you're struggling with at a personal level that has nothing to do with your partner, but yeah, is leading to this dynamic where you're constantly rejecting them. And so then it turns into a relational issue, right? Then other times, and I think this is more of, the examples that you're talking about, Larry, is yes, there's going to be a level of resentment that can be caused if one person feels, for example, like they're doing a huge proportion of the division of household labor, right? Which tends to, even in couples where, the woman is out earning the man, still tends to fall disproportionately on women's shoulders, right? And so it could be that she's feeling that she's sort of lost her identity within the relationship, and that she is subsumed with, as women are often socialized to do in our culture, to be the person that meets the needs of everybody else. And then is naturally going to feel a sense of resentment for that, but can't quite articulate it because meeting the needs of everyone else has been what she's taught really at a, sociocultural level is what she's meant to be doing. Right. And then it's, so then it leads to this pattern of rejection or anger. And yeah, that can start to really destroy the fabric of the relationship. And, I think that this gets to one of the biggest myths that, exists in how you keep the flame alive in a long-term relationship, which is, this notion that distance makes the heart grow fonder. What we have from decades of research by the Gottmans is that distance doesn't make the heart grow fonder. What makes the heart grow fonder is developing a sense of each other's love maps, right? Understanding everything about your partner, what they want, what they desire, not just what they ate for breakfast or what they did that day or, what's going on at work, but really, what are their interests? What do they want? What are they about? What are they passionate about? What, two, if they have a particular hobby, knowing who are the friends that they do that with, what are the rules, being interested even in the details, the day-to-day details of what it is that they're both interested in. And I mean, that goes back to exactly the issue that you were speaking to, which is that so often I think, women especially can just feel like they're not being seen, not being heard, and feel a little bit invisible in the relationship. But I don't want to underestimate, just how rejecting and awful this can feel to, if you're, for example, a male partner on the other end of that, that, I mean, that's not something, this isn't just only on your shoulders to have to fix, right? It's just understanding that this rejection cycle that you've gotten into, it really is going to be a collaborative effort to try to work through it, but that your feelings are understandable, right? I mean, of course you're feeling like, detached and a sense of rejection. And yeah, it can be a huge hit to your self-esteem to feel like your partner that you love so much doesn't desire you anymore, right? I mean, that can really feel horrible. But if you can kind of come to your partner and instead of saying, you never want to have sex with me, what's wrong with you? Or what's wrong? What am I doing? Focus on, instead of framing sex, that can kind of feel like it's framing sex in a little bit of a transactional way, right? In other words, talk about what are the feelings that we need to kind of get to help us to reconnect so that we feel like we can break out of that cycle of chronic rejection and resentment.
I love that. So creating that environment where conversations may be welcome and safe,
Yes.
where it's more just that connected conversation. You mentioned in there where a woman might not feel seen and heard,
Right.
right? And one of the things that we teach is how to do that. But I would love actually your perspective from a woman's perspective, the best way that a man can make a woman feel seen and heard.
Well, I think a lot of times, and you've probably heard this before, men, they're socialized to be fixers. So a lot of times they just want to hear and they just want to immediately jump in and say, well, this is what you should do.
I've never done that, by the way.
Oh, no, I'm sure you
For a
haven't.
record, ever.
I'm sure you haven't. And sometimes it's not that it's not that I mean, it can be helpful to ask in the beginning, right? If your wife or, or female partner, or male partner is feeling like they're stressed out about something, right? It can be helpful in the beginning to say, how can I support you? Do you want me? Um, can I listen to you just vent, or do you want me to try to suggest solutions? Right. And that can kind of help you to sort of set you up for success, because it might be that she just needs to vent for a minute, and just needs to get it out there and isn't quite ready to sort of transition into that place where you think about, okay, what can be done about this? But it's just really building those active listening skills, right? And really, again, it comes back to that leading with curiosity. How are you feeling? How is your world right now? Right? What's going on with you? Right? What was the best part of your day? What was really challenging today? Right? And getting into kind of those larger, again, launched with curiosity conversations that are going to lead your partner to feel more seen. So it's about this sort of progressive question asking of details that go beyond, what's for dinner and did you pick up the dry cleaning? That really shows sort of an interest in who your partner is beyond just, their role in connection to your life and relationship and family.
I love that. I love that. I'm gonna put a couple of resources just from our end in the show notes for the guys too. So we have 25 intimate conversation starters for you guys. I'll put that in the show notes for you you and your wife, and then I've got questions for the car for you and your kids. So great questions for age ranges 5 to 8, 9 to 12, and then teenagers. So I'll put both those resources in there, both totally free. But as far as Dr. Nicole, you just came out with an incredible book.
Yes, thank
Did
you.
you sit the New York Times?
I was just in an article in the New York Times. Yes, I was on the New York Times Modern Love podcast, and then they ran an article about me, and yeah, it was really fun.
That's awesome.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome.
It was
So
so fun.
where can people find your book, and most importantly, where can they connect with you if they just want more? And as far as like services you offer, is it therapy? Is it
Yes.
coaching? What does it look like?
So, right now, so first of all, yes, please buy my book. It's available wherever bookstores are sold. And I love that by the way, I just want to add, I love that you are linking resources for questions. I also have a number of questions that are specific that can kind of lead to these deeper types of conversations, both in your relationship as well as in your sex life, that are in my book, the chapter on sexual communication. So I hope that you'll look there too. But yes, for my book, it's available wherever books are sold. And yes, you can also follow me on social media at Nicole underscore the sex professor. And if you want to take my class, you can actually take it at the University of Washington over the summer quarter. So I am offering that now to people who are outside the university.
That is so cool. That is so thorough. We're going to have all those links in the show notes for you guys. Or if you
Great.
guys go to thedadedge.com/1430. But Dr. Nicole, I do have one more question for you. I'm down with this
Please.
question. Like I said, guys, thedadedge.com/1430 for all these. But here's my last question. So I spent 20 years in medical device sales. So like when people ask me what I did for a living, I was like, oh, I sell surgical devices, super easy. And now when people ask me like, what do you do for a living? I was like, I make a living on a microphone. And then,
Yeah.
like, what do you do? Are you on radio? I'm like, no, I'm a podcaster. And then they'll ask, what podcast? I'm like, I have a podcast for dads. I am so curious.
Yeah.
Is someone, what do you do for a living? What do you say? What's the reaction?
Oh, I love this question. It completely depends on A, what mood I'm in, and B, who I'm talking to.
Right.
Right. So if I sit down and I'm on a flight and I'm sitting next to a chatty person and I just want to take a nap.
It's better already. Yeah. What do you
And
do?
I just want to like go to sleep and check out, I just say I'm a psychology professor. And then, I mean, which is true. I'm in the psychology department at the University of Washington. I am a psychology professor. Um, but if it is, in any other kind of environment, I say I'm a sex professor, right? And that leads to questions because, again, I think there needs to be less stigma around it. We need to have more honest conversations. I am about getting information out there that's data driven so people can make their own choices. And yeah, let's have some fun with it because sex should be fun.
I love it. I love it. And by the way, I love your energy. Like it's contagious. Like
You.
your happiness like just radiates like through the screen. So
Thank
this was
you.
this was awesome.
I
Thank you
love
so
your
much.
kindness and warmth. Thank you, Larry. This was so much fun. I really enjoy it.
Me too. Me too. This was awesome. I guarantee the downloads are going to be huge for this one because of the
Yeah.
topic. And you gave just such great advice. I just
Good.
appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, this was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hey, you bet. Like I said, guys, head on over to thedadedge.com/1430 for this show. We'll have all of Dr. Nicole's links in there, all of her resources, some of my resources in there for you as well. But we're trying to make marriages better in 2026. And what better start than with our sex lives, right?
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Larry. Thank you.